I've been working on my Tbr7 review for quite a while now, a couple hundred miles. So we're actually at 2,077 kilometers and 24 kilometers on our new rear sprocket. And before I finish this video, I wanted to get the rear sprocket on. Now that I have the rear sprocket on and I took it for a test drive, I think I'm going to keep this bike for on-road use only if I keep it. I don't think you can really use these bikes off-road like I can my Yamaha. So I'll just say that at the start of this video. If you're looking at getting a Hawk or a Tbr7, they're not off-road bikes in my opinion. If you want to get one of these and use it on the road, you can just do the simple sprocket upgrades, very basic stuff. So there's one more thing I want to add before we get into the full review video. I put even more miles on it now. We're up to 40 kilometers on our new rear sprocket. And I'll just go over the modifications to my Tbr7. We're running the factory carburetor with a larger main jet. I went with a larger front sprocket to the 17, and that made a noticeable difference. That was the first thing I did. And after doing that, I decided to keep it only on the street, so I went to the 39 tooth rear sprocket. And the Tbr7 came with the 46 tooth rear sprocket. Now I know that's different on the Hawks, and I think it's because of the tires. They give you different sprocket sizes, but it's the same thing. If you change the sprockets on the Hawks to a larger front one and a smaller rear one, you would get the same upgrade. The new upgraded sprocket setup, I'm pretty happy with it on the street. You can cruise around in 4th gear more, 3rd gear in town. You don't have to go right to 5th gear to be cruising at 35, 40 miles an hour. So I apologize if this video sounds a little negative about the Tbr7 or the Hawks, but if you plan to keep it on the street for light use, just like a heavy-duty scooter, then I think you're good if you just do the sprocket changes and it keeps up with traffic. It has plenty of power for the street use, for a good beginner street bike. And I know a lot of people have said that they think about getting this bike as a first bike to see if they like dual sports before they spend tons of money on a Yamaha or a Honda. And I would say that's a bad idea, because this isn't really a good representation of a dual sport. It's very heavy, it's cheaply made, it's gonna rust, you can't really off-road it without breaking it. So you might get one of these and after a year think that you don't like dual sport motorcycles. This is gonna be the 1,000 mile review for my 2019 Tbr7. So yes, I said it's a 2019 Tbr7, which is really weird because my receipt says I paid for a 2020 Tbr7. So I bought it from Q9 Power Sports and I wouldn't do business with them. It doesn't really bother me because this Tbr7 has all the features I want. I know some people get Tbr7s and they don't have the skid plate and they ask me where I got it. And some of them might not have the disc brake, but this one does. So overall, there's nothing on this bike that I think is different on the 2020 model. It's just my receipt says I paid for a 2020 and you sold me a 2019. I might just insert the list of stuff like shipping damage and some of the beginning problems I noticed with it instead of going over them again. But if you guys haven't seen those videos, you can expect a little bit of shipping damage when you get your bike. Mine had the rims damaged a little bit. I had to paint the forks. I did buy the shipping insurance, so they did replace some parts at no cost. Here's one of the parts that was damaged. The tire rubbed against that in the shipping crate. It's really no big deal, and now that I know how easy the plastics scratch, that's really minor compared to the bike. They did replace this tail panel even though they sent me a white one, so that's useless for me. The plastics do scratch really easy, so they're a very brittle plastic, and when you scratch them, the blue is just paint on top. It's not a solid blue piece of polymer. My Honda fenders, they're red, but if you take a razor knife and take a chunk out of it, it's still going to be red in there because it's a solid piece of red polymer. But anyways, one thing about having the handguards on is this is a constant battle for me. This white paint right here, because I just slam it through the doorway and then the white paint gets on the handguards. But this will pretty much all come off except for a few scrapes. Pretty much good as new. A couple little scratches on there, but no big deal. And after I clean it, I would say, oh, I'm not going to slam it through the doorway again. But I'll slam it right through the doorway again. So one of the reasons I want to sell the bike is the forks. The front forks are not made very well. They're very flimsy. In my first videos, I think you can hear me say on the GoPro that I thought I saw them moving when I was riding the bike. And I can confirm you can definitely see them moving when you're riding on rough ground. The bottom of the forks are traveling in the way they shouldn't be traveling. Another thing I don't like about it is it's very heavy for a 250. So one big thing I noticed at 1100 miles is the suspension is getting much softer. And I really don't weigh a lot, so it's kind of surprising. Another thing I don't like about it is the Kickstart. I've got the Kickstart to work once or twice, but it doesn't really work. Right here, the Kickstart hits the foot peg, so maybe it doesn't start because you're not getting a full stroke. I'm not sure. I will tell you that the day that I did get the Kickstart working was right after I adjusted the valve, so all my Tau scooters, the Kickstart works really good, so that's surprising. Stuff like this here. This pipe isn't even lined up with the upper one really, so they just glob the welds on. But over here, where my finger is, that should all be pushed forward more. I feel like if I say that the Tbr7 is a good bike, I'll lose credibility with anybody who has a Yamaha or Honda. So at the same time, I'm not a motorcycle snob saying, oh, you have to buy a Yamaha Dual Sport, because I would never buy a name brand scooter, a Yamaha Zuma or a Honda Ruckus. I'm 100% on board with cheap Chinese scooters. And that's the main thing I explained in another video, and I'm sorry if I keep going over it, but the way you ride a Dual Sport is different than the way you're going to ride a cheap Chinese scooter. A cheap Chinese scooter, you're going to ride it on the street and the strength of the forks wouldn't really matter. And I understand that my Tbr7 videos will probably get more views than my XT225 videos, because it's going to be a more popular bike. These are growing brands. And the Hawks and the Apollos and the TT250s, they're all pretty similar, and everyone's going to be different. I know some people get them and they don't even run right out of the box. They got to do a lot of stuff to it. Mine fired up. What is that? Just one. Usually there's more than one. One thing that really made me start liking the Tbr7 was adding the Pelican case, as silly as that sounds, because it really increased the use for this bike. So if I was riding a scooter, I could go somewhere and get a small cheese pizza and you just put it on the floorboard where your feet goes. It fits fine. And then when I got this, there's no way to transport something like a small pizza. This is the perfect fitment for a cheese pizza, and seeing the box open is not good. That means I probably got a little carried away on the riding, and it's, oh, not too bad. Perfect, I didn't mess it up at all. The farthest I've ridden mine is 30 miles one way non-stop, and that's probably between 40 miles an hour and 60 miles an hour the whole way. So I went over the shipping damage in my other videos, and the replacement parts they sent me. So I was going to change this headlight bracket out. It goes behind the blue piece because one of these tabs is broken off. So I'll pop this headlight cover off and we'll show you what's going on behind there. So you can expect, if you take stuff apart on this bike, like the simple little headlight screw out of the plastic there, that all the threads will come right with it and then it's not going to go back in. So all we did was take it apart to fix this because it shipped to us broken. So I went and got a couple extra screws. I found one that fits, and then I tried to tighten up the other side, and what's happening there? Oh, it pulled all the plastic threads right on out. It's just a ticking time bomb. Going through all this stuff, I noticed more and more things wrong with it. Can you guys notice what's wrong with this picture here? So when I'm riding my bike, I sort of noticed the headlight part flapping. And I always just ignored it because I knew I had a busted bracket, right? So I figured the headlight wasn't really secured. And then now as I'm putting it back together and I'm looking at it, this ear here is the thing that flaps in the breeze. And this one here is much shorter. You guys see that, right? These are unmodified. I haven't touched it in any way. So that's how it sits in there with your foot tab in the bottom. It was no big deal to not have it. It just sat on the fender a little bit. I always keep my Tbr7 inside, so any rust and stuff like that you see is going to be on a bike that's kept inside. So if you keep your bike outside, you could expect more rust. I'm sure a lot of people are looking at the review and they want someone to tell them that it's a good bike or it's not a good bike. And I go back and forth on it every day, even from sitting over there to standing on this side of the bike. Now that I'm back over here and I see this rust again, it's like, oh yeah, I should definitely just sell it for $1,500. Little stuff like the brake pedal here, it always hits the kickstart. So it's either hitting inside here and it hits this part, or you bend it out and it hits the nut there. So the brake pedal on this bike's pretty flimsy, just like everything else, poorly welded. But all this stuff, it's sort of rattly. You would get a better fitment on, you know, your name brand bikes. Not trashing this bike, but all these little vibrations add up when you're doing 60 miles an hour. Back to our 1,000-mile review. Let's talk skid plates. Some people have them, some people don't. I know some of the early Hawks don't have them, and it might be the same with the Tbr7s. So you don't have to take your skid plate off for the oil change, but it's going to get dirty if you don't. So this is how your skid plate mounts to the Tbr7. There's 4 bolts there, and then 2 more underneath that go in this skid plate here, and then 2 more on the back of this one, so you could take this one off too. And I think I might just start riding mine like this, because you have enough protection with this. The only thing the skid plate's really protecting is this right here. But if you look at the Yamaha or other bikes like that, they don't have this frame underneath all the way. It'll just have the engine here and it'll bolt just like this, but without all this. So that's why you need the skid plate to sort of protect it. But on here, I don't think it's going to make much of a difference. And I'm probably only going to use this bike on the street anyways, so I guess it's pretty much due for a change. Right? And I always tip the bike because I get a bit more out of this little left hole when I tip it. So it comes down to, do I want to leave the skid plate on for looks because it looks tougher, or do I want to take the skid plate off and have better engine cooling? I got sidetracked thinking about taking the bottom skid plate off. I pulled it right off the blocks, never even put any oil in it, so we should probably fill it with oil if we're going to ride it. So here's a look at the bottom of the Tbr7, and once you take the front skid plate off, you still have this brace, and you have this bottom skid plate which just sort of flaps in the breeze, held down by these 2 bolts in the rear. So we're going to take those off and see what it looks like. So we got our bottom plate off, and that's not very thick, so I'm not too concerned with the weight on this one. That's not bad. That one's much heavier. This is how your skid plates bolt together on the bottom one there. So if you have a Tbr7 and you go out and you take the front skid plate off, I will say it does look kind of silly. It looks like it doesn't belong. But once you take that bottom plate off and it opens up this space here and you can see through it, it looks much better. So just taking the front one off doesn't look good, but if you take the front one off and the bottom one off, it looks good to me. And you still have this plate here, so it's up to you. It's your choice if you want to leave your skid plate on or not. I would have been disappointed if I got one without a skid plate, but now that I have a skid plate, I think I could get a lot better cooling without it. So I think I said this in one of my first videos when I compared it to a very cool heavy-duty scooter. And I still think that's what it is. It looks a lot cooler going down the road. When I just went cruising down by the beach, there's people on scooters, and to the general public, you're going to look cooler than the people on scooters. But in my opinion, it's not much better than a scooter. So if the snapshots are blurry, it's because I can only edit in blurry video. One thing I noticed after riding the XT225 for a couple days, and then I went to move the Tbr7, and it's so heavy I almost fell over. But now that I put the rear sprocket on, I like it for the street, so we're going to be doing more street stuff. I even put stickers on it just like the Yamaha, so when you ride it, they're in the same place and you can trick yourself into thinking you're riding the Yamaha. So at the start of this video I told you guys I upgraded the rear sprocket, and for a full video on that I'm working on it to really be thorough. I'm going to put probably 100 kilometers on it and then pull the rear wheel off and check it and make sure there's no play and we're all good. So right now we're only at 24. We'll do top speed test and all that. A very thorough sprocket video will come out when we do it. So if you're trying to decide between the Tbr7 and the Hawk, one thing you see on the Hawk is it has off-road tires. I'm so glad I didn't buy the Hawk because it has off-road tires. Because that's not a selling point on this bike because it's not an off-road bike in my opinion. So I know a lot of people don't like when I compare the Chinese bike to my Yamaha, but that's all I can do is give you an honest opinion. And if you look at the videos where I ride the Yamaha, I could never do that with this bike. It's too heavy, it's too big, it's too flimsy. So I think that covers everything on my Tbr7 review. So that's all for now.